Right, we are now at step 7. So step 7 says, with right sides together, pin center seam, matching inner seams, leg seams, and notches, stitch. To reinforce the seam, stitch again over first stitching, and then serge the crotch seam together. So what that means, so this is the crotch seam, the U shape. We are putting our right sides together. And what it means by matching the seam, so you just stitched your inseam and you pressed it flat. So you're putting it on top of each other, make sure it matches. And then you're gonna pin that seam allowance down. And then I always start at the top here and at the top over here on this side. And then I'm going to pin that U shape. Make sure you're matching your raw edges or your cut edges. And then pinning it. Again, you're pinning your notches together. So this one is the 3 notches. So 3 notches tells me that's the back. And then I'm going to continue up to the front piece. So the 2 notches means it's the front. And just pinning those raw edges together. Okay, now I'm going to stitch the crotch seam. So again, I'm at 5/8 of an inch. I've pressed my back button at the beginning and my clip. And I'm just going to stitch the seam, making sure that edge is right next to the magnet, and go slowly when you're going around that curve, because curves are a little bit harder to stitch than a straight line. And then also making sure that that flat seam allowance stays flat, that it doesn't get all flipped up in there. So I'm going slowly around that curve and taking my pins out and putting them into my pin cushion each time I stop. And then a back stitch at the end. And it's going to clip it for me. And then the guide sheet also said to stitch 1/4 inch away. So what that means is we're going to give it another stitch right next to this stitch, just so it's a little more stable, because we don't want our crotch seam to rip. So what you're going to do is put the edge of your presser foot on your seam line, and you're just going to stitch again. Okay, so you're using the edge of the presser foot as your guide, not the magnet anymore. And again, making sure our seam allowance is flat as you stitch it. Okay, now that we have our 2 stitches stitched, now we're just going to serge the edge of our crotch seam and going slowly around that curve, making sure the seam allowance is flat and making sure everything's flat, because we don't want to end up cutting our pajama pants. Okay, you can even lift it up to make sure it's flat under there before you stitch it. So now we have our crotch seam sewn. It looks like this big U. And now we're up to step 8. So step 8 says stitch front to back at side seams, press the side seams open. So it looks like this right now. If we stitch these 2 together, you're not going to be able to put your pants on. So what you're going to do is you're going to open it up. And flip it this way. so that your right sides are together. And now it looks like a pair of pants that you can put your leg into. So what it means by stitch this front to the back, this is the front, this is the back. And again, we're gonna pin at the top and we're gonna pin at the bottom. And then we're gonna just keep pinning all the way on both sides. Okay, now that we have it pinned on the side seams, we're just going to stitch it again 5/8 of an inch on both sides. And going slowly over the pocket and taking out my pins as I go. So you're gonna do both sides and then you'll take it over to the iron and I will show you how to press the seam open. Now that we have our side seam stitched, now we're gonna take it over to the iron again and we're just gonna press that seam open all the way down. Okay, and you're gonna do that on both sides.